BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with the Farming Today podcast, where we ask if the EU-UK deal could mean that newly set up border control facilities could now be shut down.
Once the deal is done, the final arrangements are sorted, we're expecting there will be a scaling back of some checks. So there will be a decommissioning of some facilities. We need to work through where and how.
More on that later. But first, a new set of targets to tackle climate change have been recommended to Scottish Government ministers, replacing those scrapped last year. It effectively delays short-term progress by 6 years, but keeps Scotland on track to meet its long-term goal of net zero emissions by 2045. The report, published today by the Climate Change Committee, has an emphasis on nature and farming, as BBC Scotland's environment correspondent Kevin Keane reports.
So big changes are afoot if the Scottish Government adopts these recommendations and the suggested pathway to achieving them. Firstly, trees, lots of them. Scotland will have to plant 38% of all the UK's new woodlands between now and 2050. That's because there's more available land here. That will mean farmers having to plant some of those new trees. And that's, of course, controversial because farmers don't want to lose productive arable land. Of course, there is a lot of land here that's not so productive, a lot of upland sheep farming, and the report recommends that all of us eat less meat and dairy for a healthier diet. That would reduce herd sizes, and so woodland would be a way for those farmers to diversify. Now, there is an urgency to this because those trees need to be maturing by around 2040 when they're most effective at absorbing carbon dioxide. And so the report says tree planting needs to be upscaled rapidly. And that's a big gear shift because the Scottish Government is already missing its tree planting targets. And last year it slashed the budget for new woodland by 40%. So be sure with the Holyrood election next year, none of this is going to be plain sailing.
Kevin Keane reporting. Every day this week we're hearing the latest news on bovine TB, a respiratory disease in cattle which successive governments have tried to control over decades. More than £100 million a year is spent on compensating farmers for culled cattle and for culling badgers, both of which can spread the disease. In a moment I'll be talking to the Badger Trust about culling. Another alternative is to vaccinate badgers against the disease, but this is time-consuming and expensive. Helen Millican's been to meet one Cumbrian landowner who's trying to protect both her farming neighbours and her resident badgers by having them vaccinated, with the help of the Cumbria Badger Vaccination Project.
I know that the badger set is within about 5 to 10 metres away maximum. I'm going to shove the spade into the ground to create a little slit down the back, and I'm going to put a scoop of peanuts in, and then I'm going to close up the ground, and that stone is going exactly where that bait point is. Between now and next week, every day Heather will be coming down and she'll be rebaiting the bait points. I'll have the cameras up, and when I come back next week to dig in the traps, we'll have a really good idea how many badgers, and we'll have trained the badgers to go to the area that we want them to put the traps in.
So much preparation involved, Heather. What is it that's prompted you to get in touch with Cumbria Badger Vaccination Project?
Initially, we knew the cull was coming our way. Some of my neighbours have cattle, we don't, we just sheep around here. They asked, knowing that I had a big badger set on my land, whether we would consider putting our land in for the cull area as well. I don't like killing things, so I had long chats with the NFU, I spoke to DEFRA, I spoke to neighbours with cattle, I spoke to badger charities, did a lot of research on the government websites as well. And because this badger set has been here for decades, the general feeling around me with some of the farmers I was speaking to was that these badgers were probably TB free, and there was an understanding amongst them that if you eradicate a badger set, other badgers will ultimately move in. So it made more sense to me to vaccinate. It was very difficult because with the change of government we didn't know whether a cull would come to this area or be stopped. Somewhere along the line, I was given Sally's name as someone who could come and vaccinate.
The process that you've described to me does sound a long, reasonably complex and a little bit onerous one as well. Just how practical is it to do this on a larger scale?
I think it's going to take quite a bit of planning. We're a small team of about 15, 20 people, but it doesn't necessarily have to be all done by us as the Badger Vaccination Project. I'm 2/3 of the way through the process of becoming a trainer so that I can train up other vaccinators, and whether that's a farmer, whether that's a gamekeeper, then we can build an army of vaccinators.
But you have to keep doing this over a course of several years.
We're not going to get all of them in 1 year. And it's the same with culling. Culling is a 4-year project as well.
Nobody at any level on any side of this wants to eradicate badgers completely. We've culled to a point. We just need to find the way forward that's going to work for everybody.
That report from Helen Millican in Cumbria. Well, agriculture is devolved, so different parts of the UK have their own approach to tackling bovine TB, and we'll be hearing from Northern Ireland and Wales later in the week. In England, in its manifesto, the Labour Party promised to end what it described as the ineffective badger cull, and now says it's working at pace on a revised TB eradication strategy, which includes increased badger vaccination and a national wildlife surveillance programme to better understand the disease. But last year, some badger culling licences were still granted by Natural England, a decision that's going to be challenged in the High Court later this year by the Badger Trust and the charity Wild Justice. Nigel Palmer is CEO of the Badger Trust.
Our legal challenge in a nutshell was that the 2024 licences for supplementary culls were issued under the wrong conditions. Obviously, it's meant to be for public health by disease eradication. And actually, we've got statements from DEFRA saying it was to keep farmers on board, which is not a reason to cull badgers.
Do we know how important badgers are for the spread of TB to cattle?
It's actually, I would say, the other way round. It's already been recorded that 95% of all BTB transmission is cattle to cattle.
It's difficult to make links, isn't it? But it is true that the rates of bovine tuberculosis have been coming down in England since the badger cull started.
Yes, and I would contest that that is because there have been cattle restriction measures on movements and other things, and also like on-farm changes. I still genuinely believe that culling has no significant impact.
OK, well, there are quite a few people who might contend with that and say that the figures show something different. What are you hoping for from the government's revised approach, which we're told will include increased cattle testing?
We do think that that is a vital part of it, because we believe the current testing is actually at best 50% efficient, and that's not good enough for farmers. Badgers are a distraction from the real issue, because the bovine TB is in cattle.
It is, absolutely, and that's why there are restrictions on moving cattle, and that's why cattle that do test positive are culled.
Yes, and that's very true. We also, though, and this is how we would like to see it go forwards, but cattle vaccination, if you change your testing, and there are tests now available which can differentiate between a vaccinated cow and a cow that has the disease, is infected, but also is infectious. And that's a really important classification to bring into this. And I don't think the government are being clear with the farmers. They should be pushing forwards with this technology.
We heard that report from Cumbria about vaccinating badgers. Now, what part does that have to play, do you think?
Well, it's very good for badgers in as much as it protects them from bovine TB. The reality is badger vaccination is not going to stop BTB in cattle. There's been a badger blame game for a long time, and the problem has not been addressed. And that, it really and truly is what we would want to see.
Nigel Palmer from the Badger Trust. DEFRA told us it would not be appropriate to comment on legal proceedings. If you want to hear more about the development of a cattle vaccine, you can listen back to Monday's programme on BBC Sounds. The Secretary of State for the Environment has said the new EU-UK deal, which includes allowing EU boats to fish in our waters for a further 12 years, is reasonably good for UK fishing. Steve Reid was speaking to MPs on the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Select Committee. The chair put it to him that fishers were extremely disappointed, quoting the Scottish Fishermen's Federation, which called the deal a horror show. But Mr Reid said the deal is better than it would have been if the EU had had its way.
I think this is a reasonably good deal for the UK fishing sector. Compared to what some of the speculation was, and indeed some of the pressures on our negotiating team, the EU were interested in more quota, more access to EU territorial waters. They were looking for a deal on fishing in perpetuity, and they were trying to achieve that by making what I felt was a spurious link between fishing and an SPS deal. Our negotiating team held absolutely firm.
He added that fish exports to the EU will become easier because of another part of the deal, which means the UK and EU will now move towards an agreement which would reduce the paperwork and border checks on foods like meat and dairy. Since Brexit, border post facilities have been set up to handle those checks on imports, and Chair of the committee, Alistair Carmichael, asked if they might now be downscaled or even dismantled. Emily Miles, a senior civil servant at DEFRA, replied.
Once the deal is done, the final arrangements are sorted, we're expecting there will be a scaling back of some checks. So there will be a decommissioning of some facilities. We need to work through where and how. The consequences of having fewer checks on food coming in means that there won't need to be as many checks done at the border, so we'll need less. What we mustn't do is decrease the ability to look at illegal imports. The checks, a lot of the facilities that got built for Brexit were for trade, people who want to be compliant. So
this is properly treated imported commercial imports, not personal use.
Yeah, exactly.
And the border target operating model, fruit and veg sector are currently gearing up for additional checks on the 1st of July. Should they continue with that?
So the question of the 1st of July is under active consideration. I think that's the phrase.
Well, I mean, we're sitting here on the 20th of May. The 1st of July is not very far away. What should they be doing? Or should they be preparing for something on the 1st of July that they're then going to have to ditch on the 1st of September?
At the moment, in law, the 1st of July checks have to come in. We're reviewing that, and we need government to agree if that's going to proceed.
Emily Miles, Director General for Food, Biosecurity and Trade at DEFRA. The agreement around reduced border checks involves the UK aligning with EU standards, but there are some areas that still need to be negotiated, especially where the UK has developed different regulations since Brexit. For example, precision breeding or gene editing is going ahead in the UK, and it's something that Steve Reid told the committee he's keen to continue.
We continue with the legislation. If you've seen the deal, you'll see that the door remains open to an agreement around that. That's what we're working towards. That's what I'm optimistic we will achieve. But it's an important part of the wider programme I've got to increase profitability in the farming sector. If we can increase yields, then everything else being equal, we increase profitability for the farming sector.
DEFRA Secretary Steve Reid. That's all from us today. I'm Anna Hill. The producer is Heather Simons. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.